bad news is that what has been accomplished so far has been accomplished by using the low-hanging fruit, the easiest developed resources, the most productive resources, and that's worked. But if you look at what has been developed and the characteristics, generally they have not required a lot of additional transmission. There have been relatively few permitting complications. The capacity factors, the quality of the wind resources have been fairly good, not necessarily the best wind resources, but they've been good enough to make the numbers work. But if you visualize the total supply of available resources as a cost curve, with the easiest, least expensive resources to the left and getting more expensive and more difficult as you go to the right, what that suggests is that going beyond the RPS, the next increment of renewable energy development, will have some challenges that haven't really been particularly significant showstoppers today. So the challenge in working towards a clean energy future beyond the RPS is to look at strategies that will essentially change the dynamics of the resources that are developed. How do you get to the areas that have the highest capacity factors, that have the highest productivity potential? How do you do that in a way that minimizes the impact on habitat so that you have to build fewer transmission lines to get to the best areas to deliver the most electricity to customers? This is something that has been discussed at the regional level with the Western Governors Association, regional reliability entities, and I can tell you right now that a lot of that most wildlife and environmental organizations have been heavily engaged in this because they want to see renewable energy development, but they want to see it done in a way that has the least impact on habitat. So these are the challenges. It's been easy to get the low-hanging fruit so far, but it's going to be progressively more difficult the farther we go up that curve. So there are a lot of puzzles to be solved, and none of these puzzles are showstoppers. They're the sorts of problems that power engineers really love to get into and figure out, and and come up with solutions that would work. And this is really, and as I said, these discussions are already going on. There's been a lot of work, a lot of research that we've done at NREL, but also at other national laboratories and others across the West. Transmission access to least cost renewable resources. A lot of that study has been done already. The frontier is really more in the policy area more than it is in the technical area. We know where the resources are, we know what the transmission needs to look like, but how do you get to the decision of investing the money needed to get that transmission to happen? Flexibility. The wind resources and the solar resources that we've identified, although they can be productive, they can be variable. Now, they don't cause variability on the system that didn't exist before. Load varies up and down all the time. It always has, and that's why utilities have reserves to deal with this variability. So the question is, how can we accommodate the additional variability, either through demand response, by additional flexible natural gas reserves. Wind turbines themselves, new generations of wind turbines, have the capacity to provide some operational flexibility. This is a fairly new point in the evolution of wind turbine technology, but the challenge now is how to get that capacity out there on the system so it can be used by the utilities to help manage this variability. And then storage. And storage is an area where you find a lot of disagreement, certainly within technology experts at NREL, but also all over. There's a lot of attention paid on storage. We've looked at the question of storage and the value of storage, and compressed air storage, battery storage, flywheel storage, and the additional benefit that could provide in managing higher penetrations of wind power. What we found is that it can be just as cost effective, if not more cost effective, to augment the existing reserve capacity on the system, because there's not a wind variability that is separate from the rest of the variability on the system. So that's a question: storage versus using the reserves that are already on the system. Then finally, a major challenge is strategic geographic diversity of wind and solar resources to meet, to reduce the variability that has to be managed on the system. And here's why. Here are a couple of examples. If you have 100 megawatts of wind at one point, you'll have a certain degree of hour-to-hour variability in what that 100 megawatts will produce. If you separate that into two 50-megawatt wind farms, and you have them in places that are essentially independent of each other with respect to variability of wind, the combined variability of those two wind sites will be much smaller than the variability that you have at that one site. So the more geographic diversity you have, the more the variability tends to cancel each other out, and you have a smaller problem to deal with. And it's easier to manage larger penetrations of wind on the system. The catch is, you can't all do that in your backyard. It's very difficult to get that type of geographic diversity within the boundaries of Colorado. It's much easier if you integrate the system on a regional basis. And many of those strategies, not only geographic diversity, but a lot of other operational issues that are being examined right now, work better and in some cases require a larger geographic footprint. And I think this is probably where the biggest challenge is going to be for next generation renewable development. Not just Colorado alone, but what is Colorado's role in a regional picture with its neighboring states. Reserve sharing, resource diversity, various operational issues that work better when you have a larger pool of resources to draw from. And then there's also the question of interstate trade. You recall from the slide before, Colorado has an abundance of wind resources, some of the best wind resources in the country.
I think there are 5 reasons to be bullish about long-term on renewable energy in general and in Colorado in particular. One is its availability for compliance with climate goals. We'll come back to all of these points. Lower costs of wind and solar in recent years are very impressive, the cost reductions, and there's going to be more of them. Renewables are now accepted by utilities and by consumers in a much more robust way than it has been. I've got examples of that. The interplay with the smart grid, with the making the distribution system able to accommodate variable generation and microgrids or pockets of generation in the network, that's something which is going to free up many of the today's barriers to renewables. And I will also argue that the utility business model is being rethought and being reconstituted. That's another project that I'm working on. I won't have time to talk about that much today, but I will say a couple things about that. David mentioned an NREL report. If you haven't read this, at least read the executive summary. It's only 80 pages long. The report will put most phone books to shame. It's probably 850 pages, but it's a really important report. What are the findings of the NREL? REF stands for Renewable Energy Future. What NREL took on was a task of figuring out, could we get to 80% renewables by 2050, the date on which we want to get carbon emissions in the electric sector significantly reduced. Here's what they found. There is more than adequate renewable resources available to supply 80% of the U.S. electricity markets in every hour. So no brownouts, no blackouts. The flexibility can come from a portfolio of supply and demand side options, including conventional generation. We'll get to that in a minute, how much of that there will need to be. But also grid storage, more transmission. You heard David talk about these things. He also mentioned this magic word. There are multiple paths for doing this. NREL found that the 80% renewable future was actually, you could get there in lots of different ways. And finally, everybody else asked the question, what about the cost of it? They found that the renewable energy future was no more costly or in the realm of the same cost as any other clean technologies. In other words, if you accept that we're going to have to make these reductions in carbon and in other criteria pollutants, renewables are not going to be more expensive as a total package than other proposals such as nuclear, such as carbon sequestration from coal and natural gas. So I'm going to run through a bunch of pretty maps now. This is NREL's assessment of what the various renewable technologies are across the nation. So let's just work on a couple of them here. Solar, concentrating solar, they estimate 37,000 gigawatts. Solar photovoltaics on the left or right-hand column there, 80,000 gigawatts. Wind, 10,000 gigawatts. So what? What do these numbers mean? Well, a helpful fact is the U.S. peak load is 800 gigawatts. So every one of these numbers is 10 and 15 and 20 times the size that would be needed. Nobody's planning to pave over Nevada with solar cells, and I'll get back to how much land use would be required, but the point is that we have so many renewable resources in this country in such quantities that the supply of renewables is really not going to be an issue. So here's where we start today with the mix of fuels that's in place today. And NREL started with this picture. You'll see the various, you can pick out your favorite fuel there, whether it's coal or biomass or whatever. The dotted line is the electrical load. That's the assumption with energy efficiency built into it. So that's the dotted line up there is the net load. You'll see it's flat to 2050 essentially. That's NREL's working assumption. What would we have to do with this fuel mix to get to 80% renewables? Well, this is what NREL postulates. Wind grows significantly, a lot more wind. The amount of photovoltaics in here is actually modest in some respects. They took a least cost path, so wind is still on this horizon considered to be less costly than is these other renewable resources. You'll see that, and by the way, this is terawatt hours, so this is an energy measure on the vertical axis there. And you'll see that the amount of natural gas, that's the blue in this, excuse me, the amount of coal and natural gas, that's the dark blue and the light blue, shrinks to probably only about 15% of today's levels. That will be needed in the NREL modeling to stabilize the system to provide backup and peaking power. Now, what about the costs of these various technologies? From another paper that I wrote, I'm going to refer to this in a minute, this is a consensus in 2010 dollars of what the costs are of various technologies. Do I have a pointer here? I don't even know. Nope, apparently not. Okay. You got a pointer. Man for all seasons. Yeah. And what would make it point? Oh, okay. Where was I? So the nuclear fuel, which is a baseload technology, of course, tapers off. There's no assumption of new nuclear builds. I don't believe in the NREL model. The amount of coal and natural gas dips down to only about 15% of its current levels. So this is the cost of technologies. This is a consensus put together by the Union of Concerned Scientists, and you'll see that efficiency here is the lowest cost technology available for meeting load. Natural gas with highly efficient combined cycle has a cost range in that range. You'll see wind, onshore wind, geothermal, and so forth. So by the time you put all of this together, you end up with a resource stack which is, as NREL found, not that much more expensive than any other assumption you would want to go through. By the way, this chart shows what the costs of these are with and without incentives. And the bright colors are the cost of carbon assumed at various levels. I think I've used the medium cost, I've used a cost there that represents, I believe, each of those blocks at $16 a ton. We did not adjust, in the paper that I wrote and used this for, we did not adjust the 2010 numbers so we could be consistent. We also know that the costs of wind and photovoltaics have fallen sharply in the last 2 years, faster than that survey assumed. And the cost of nuclear post-Fukushima is definitely going to be higher than was thought in 2010. This is from an NREL report on the future cost of wind energy. Today is over here at this axis. 2011, I guess, was the point that they used. And all of these lines are various studies that predict the cost of wind. So there's 16 or 18 studies in this study of studies that NREL did. When you take the studies that are in the 20th to the 80th percentile range, you end up with the reductions of 20 to 30% over the next few years. Now remember, this is a time when many other resources are going to be increasing in cost, which makes wind much more valuable. You probably know about the DOE Sunshot program. They're pumping a lot of money into trying to bring the cost of solar down to $1 per watt for utility scale installations. They're on their way to doing that. They have a goal in 2017 of $1 a watt for utility scale photovoltaics. So the news is really good. I put the U.S. wind map in there just to remind you that Colorado here is on the edge of the wind belt, which goes from North Dakota through West Texas. I think you also know the Colorado insolation map. This is the amount of solar radiation in the state, with the darkest color here being the best. This is San Luis Valley right in here. But the question is, well, how do we compare to other states? Let's have a little geography quiz, states and countries. What's the country in the world with the most solar? Germany. And there's Germany, and there's their insolation level. It's often said that it's close to the same level as Alaska. What's the state in the U.S. Who's second in solar? New Jersey. Thank you very much. You all knew that one. There's New Jersey, and there's their insolation level, better than Germany. What do we call the Sunshine State? Florida. Some of you guys didn't take civics class. What's going on here? They're still counting votes. There's Florida's insolation level. And what's the hottest, possibly the most unpleasant state in the summer? Arizona, I agree. There's Arizona's insolation level. And there's Colorado. We're in very good shape in terms of what's available to us in the United States for photovoltaics.